Becky Bryan was a successful real estate agent.
She was one of their top sellers.
Her husband, Keith, was a prominent local fire chief.
President of the State Fire Chiefs Association.
They were very well known and respected.
But it was only after a shocking crime
He shot my husband in the head
that everyone in town would know their scandalous secrets.
To think that she would take pictures of herself and send them to somebody.
Text messages saying, "Come and get me."
None of us knew. It was out of the blue.
And Becky's outrageous behavior would do more than raise eyebrows. It would land her in the middle of a murder investigation.
She whips off her shirt and throws it across the table.
You want my panties too?
It was just all incredibly bizarre.
Mustang, Oklahoma, September 20th, 2011. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in this growing bedroom community a half-hour west of Oklahoma City.
A lot of people live in Mustang and work in the Oklahoma City area.
It's very middle class, and it's got a pretty good reputation.
It's a pretty low crime area.
Which made the 911 call that came into the Mustang Police Department just after 10 that evening a real shock.
This man walked into the living room and he shot my husband in the head.
But the fact that a man had just been shot in his own living room wasn't even the most shocking thing about the call. The woman on the phone was 52-year-old Becky Bryan, and her husband Keith, the man who had just been shot, was a former Mustang City councilman and the fire chief in the nearby town of Nichols Hills.
Keith was very well known and respected.
According to Becky, the shooting may have been related to Keith's position as fire chief, too. She said that she and her husband had been sitting on the couch watching TV when a young man burst into their living room.
This 26-year-old man with a hoodie cap on
Came in the home and walked up to Keith and shot him.
Keith never saw him.
What made her think the shooting was work-related was, according to Becky, the strange thing the young man said to her after he pulled the trigger.
He turned around to me and he said, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry." He said, "But your husband should have hired me."
Then, according to Becky, the shooter had run out through the garage, leaving Keith bleeding on the couch, barely alive.
My husband is laying here gasping for air. He's dripping. He's like moving. I got to have somebody here.
Not only to save her husband's life, but also to catch the man who shot him.
I'm in Mustang, America. Who would do that?
No idea, man. We're going to find him out there.
Thank you very much. Oh, my God. Just come and rush to that. Find him.
Becky and Keith had been together since high school.
They were high school sweethearts. They just grew up together.
They didn't go to the same school, however. Instead, Becky met her future husband at Lake Hefner, a popular park on Oklahoma City's north side. Keith and a friend were heading home when he spotted a pretty blonde playing volleyball with some friends.
I was driving and he said, "Stop," and noticed Becky and wanted to go over and meet her. Becky had a very outgoing personality. She always looked nice, dressed nice.
The pair made an unlikely couple. Keith was a brawny football player and a bit of a bad boy.
He was kind of known as a brawler.
Keith always liked to have the fastest car in the school.
Becky, who went to a Christian school, seemed a little more serious.
She was an intelligent person, just very engaging.
But the attraction was immediate and mutual.
He was a popular guy, nice-looking guy, and Becky had this blonde hair. I know Keith loved that.
Within days of their chance encounter in the park, Becky and Keith were dating. And in 1978, a year after their high school graduations, they were married.
I think they were both crazy about each other.
For the first few years of their marriage, Keith worked construction.
Keith had a lot of skill. He could do trim work. He could build about anything. He was quite a craftsman.
But he found his true calling in 1980 when he joined the fire department in the Oklahoma City suburb of Nichols Hills.
The Nichols Hills Fire Department just thought the world of him.
Keith was always smart and had a good head on his shoulders. I know that he was a good person and he would be good at anything that he did.
He kind of took charge if anything needed to be taken care of. He knew what he was doing.
And he definitely excelled in his new career.
He became a captain fairly quick.
He was a natural leader. People really liked him.
Becky, meanwhile, was busy raising the couple's 2 sons, the eldest of which was born 2 years after Keith joined the fire department.
She was just a very attentive mother, and Keith was as involved as he could be. They were just a normal family.
She was the mom that made sandwiches for the kids and was sort of your classic, middle American wife and mother.
They were also a church-going family. Over the years, Becky's religious background had rubbed off on the former bad boy.
Keith grew into a real godly Christian man.
And once the family moved to Mustang in the late 80s, the couple became extremely active in their local church.
Both of them sang in choir.
They were Sunday school teachers. They did premarital counseling for several years for young couples there.
It was easy to see why newlyweds turned to them for advice. After 10 years together, the Bryans appeared to be a model couple.
They loved each other a lot, and Keith would do anything for Becky, I know that.
Keith's professional life was just as impressive. In 1991, after just 10 years of service, the town of Nichols Hills promoted him to chief.
He was the youngest fire chief in the state of Oklahoma.
And it wasn't long before he was one of the most respected chiefs in the state, too.
He was the president of the State Fire Chiefs Association.
And at home, Becky certainly seemed pleased with Keith's career successes.
She was very proud of him. She was proud to be the fire chief's wife.
Then in 2004, Keith added another title to his impressive resume, Mustang City Councilman.
He wanted to make a difference in Mustang, where he lived. It was a growing city. It's still growing, and he wanted to be a part of that.
By then, Becky was already a part of Mustang's explosive growth. In her 40s, with the boys starting college, she had embarked on a new career.
She became a real estate agent.
In fact, she did more than that. Much like Keith, she found her calling.
Becky was a natural real estate agent. That's a good job for her. It's a good mix for her personality, and I think her first year, she was one of their top sellers.
She was really good at what she did.
Really professional, really together.
And once the commissions started piling up, she quickly earned considerably more than Keith's fire chief's salary.
Financially, she did well.
But as Becky's status as a top seller grew, her job became just as demanding as Keith's, requiring long hours and frequent travel for conferences and sales conventions.
The kids were older, so she didn't need to be at home. And it didn't seem to bother Keith in any way. He seemed supportive of her real estate business.
He was supportive at first, that is. But the more Becky's sales career grew, along with the time she spent with clients and at conventions, the more she seemed to change.
She started drinking a little more than she had, and she started smoking.
She would use foul language. She would say things for shock value.
The things she said even shocked her husband. One night at a dinner party, when he reminded Becky it was time to go, the former Sunday school teacher made a surprising announcement to the other couples at the table.
Becky turned to them and said, "Good night, we're going to go have sex now."
But while Keith was shocked, he wasn't exactly complaining.
At one point, he said his marriage was better than it had ever been.
He just was doting on her, can I get you something? And, just over and above.
In fact, in September of 2011, after more than 30 years of marriage, most people figured Becky and Keith were still a model couple, right up to the moment she dialed 911 to report that he had just been shot. Mustang, Oklahoma, September 20th, 2011. It was a little after 10 o'clock that night when 52-year-old Becky Bryan dialed 911 and reported that her husband, Keith, had just been shot.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
Becky is hysterical about an intruder coming into their home and shooting Keith while he's relaxing on the couch watching a movie.
According to Becky, the intruder had then fled, driving off in a pickup truck.
Can you give me a better description of the truck, like what color it was possibly, or was it too dark?
No, it's dark. It's 10 o'clock. It's like, it was a dark truck.
The fire chief in the nearby town of Nichols Hills and a former Mustang City councilman. Many of the police and EMTs responding knew Keith. And as they arrived on the scene, they were all stunned to learn that he had been shot.
When the firefighters ran up to me and told me it's Chief Bryan's house, and I was like, oh no.
But the biggest shock waited inside the house.
They get into the living room and there's Keith Bryan is sitting on the couch with a bullet in his head, and there's blood all over the couch.
Keith was unconscious and barely breathing as the paramedics went to work.
We were talking to him the whole time, telling him, come on, Chief, you can do it. You can pull through.
The paramedics loaded Keith into the ambulance and rushed him to the hospital. Becky, understandably anxious to follow, did pause long enough to give the police a brief statement.
She said, I saw this guy walked in and walked right up to Keith, put the gun right to Keith's head.
According to Becky, the shooter was a young man in his mid-20s, and she believed he was a firefighter, or at least he wanted to be one, based on something the shooter said to her moments after pulling the trigger.
She said he turned around to me and said, I'm sorry, but he should have hired me.
Becky said that after his strange apology, the shooter had fled the same way he must have come in, through the open garage door.
She told police she followed this man back outside, out the garage, enough so that she could see him pull away.
She was able to describe what the person was wearing, the age of the person, exactly what they said, exactly what they did.
Then Becky had hurried to the hospital, where her husband was being rushed into emergency surgery.
He wasn't dead. He was still breathing.
While the doctors worked on Keith, the Mustang PD did their best to locate the shooter. An extensive search failed to find the fleeing truck. Inside the Bryan's house, the investigators hoped to find more evidence that could identify the shooter.
They did things like fingerprinting the door where the perpetrator was supposed to have gone in and out.
Other evidence technicians tore apart the Bryan's couch, searching for the bullet that had sent Becky's husband to the hospital.
They found a hole in the couch where the projectile went.
The CSI techs dug the slug out of the couch, figuring it would help them identify the gun used in the shooting. But they had no sooner found it before investigators searching elsewhere made a surprising discovery. In the laundry room, hidden inside the clothes dryer, the investigators found a gun.
In the dryer, they found a blanket, and when he lifted up the blanket, out tumbled a gun and a spent shell casing and a rubber glove.
The gun, a .380 semi-automatic, was the same caliber as the slug recovered from the couch. But finding it in the dryer raised lots of puzzling questions for the investigators.
Have you ever heard of an intruder, a murderer, dumping off their weapon inside a dryer, inside the house, not taking the weapon with them to dispose of it, throw it out in a lake or whatever?
Even more suspicious was where the gun was discovered and how it matched up with Becky's account of the shooting.
She said that the intruder walked in through the garage door, shot her husband, and walked it back out through the garage door, got into his car and left.
She never said he went through the laundry room.
Had it simply been an oversight on her part?
The utility room is kind of next to the garage.
Or was there another, far more disturbing explanation?
Was it possible that Becky could have done this?
Either way, It was time the investigators talked to Becky in more detail. It was after 1 a.m. by the time the investigators arrived at the Oklahoma University Medical Center. But even at that hour, they found the ER waiting room filled with Keith's friends and colleagues.
The fire service in Oklahoma is a very close community. It really is like family.
Because of the circumstances and how tragic they were, everybody wanted to be as supportive as they could of Keith's family.
And based on what Becky had told them about the shooter and the mysterious statement he'd supposedly made, Keith's fellow firefighters were more than a little worried for their own safety, too.
Is there somebody out there coming after the other firemen or the other, chiefs?
Hoping for answers, the investigators pulled Becky aside and took her formal statement at the hospital.
If you can start from the beginning.
I had just got home from Tulsa.
Rebecca Bryan was at a conference up in Tulsa.
Becky told the investigators that she had gotten home at around 8:30 that evening, and that a woman named Debbie Proctor had dropped by not long after.
She sold a house, I think, to Debbie Proctor, and they became friends.
She sat out on the patio with Keith and I for probably 45 minutes.
According to Becky, after Debbie left, she and Keith had gone inside. She told the investigators that they were sitting in the living room watching a movie when the shooter walked in.
This young kid, about 25 years old, walks into the house, and my husband didn't even have time to turn around. He came up from here, and he shot him in the head right here.
Point blank?
Point blank.
But he didn't do a thing to her.
He's actually pretty nice. I knew he wasn't going to hurt me, because he said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but he should have hired me."
Describing the man who had just shot her husband as pretty nice wasn't the only strange thing Becky said either. When the investigators asked her for a physical description, they were taken aback by her response.
He's wearing jeans and tennis shoes. He had a white face, kind of a cute little face.
That was just a bizarre thing to say.
But what really made the investigators suspicious was how, when they asked Becky to trace the shooter's steps out of the house, she still made no mention of the laundry room.
He left, and I followed him out the garage door. That's how I know what he was driving.
She would have seen that person walk into the utility room.
Between her comments about the shooter's cute little face and the strange fact that she never said anything about the laundry room, the investigators were seriously beginning to wonder, did Becky know the shooter? Or was it even possible that she had shot her husband?
They quickly focused in on her and came to believe her story was false.
However, while the investigators suspected Becky was being less than truthful about the shooting, she was surprisingly upfront about the state of her marriage. And according to Becky, it had been far from the model relationship most people believed it to be.
A year and a half ago, I filed for divorce.
She had already bought a condominium.
Becky told the investigators that the breakup had produced a profound change in her husband.
He was a prick for 31 years, but all of a sudden a different person showed up. He started dating me.
He was trying to save his marriage. He was doing everything in his will or possibilities of trying to woo her back.
He was holding out chairs for her again.
According to Becky, Keith's wooing had worked.
He did get her to agree to some counseling, and they did that, and she eventually moved back in.
He was like a totally different person when I came back. We were quite in love. I didn't even know he loved me until I filed for divorce.
That's what Becky claimed. But was it possible their reconciliation had taken a sudden, violent turn? For the moment, the investigators didn't know. But testing her hands and clothing for gunshot residue could at least determine whether or not she had shot her husband.
Were you wearing the same clothing right now that you wore?
No. I was wearing this and panties only. And when the police arrived, I said, okay, I'm going to go get some pants on.
So you were wearing the shirt and the panties?
Yes, yes.
And when the investigators told Becky that they would want to test the shirt she had been wearing when Keith was shot, the interview took another bizarre turn.
And my panties. You want my panties too?
Well, yeah, but I mean, we'll do it afterwards. It's just.
You want my panties?
The investigator was still trying to respond when things took an even more uncomfortable turn.
She whips off her shirt and throws it across the table at him.
Wait. No, don't take it off.
Take your clothes off now. I'm sorry if I wasn't real clear. Ms. Bryan, let me finish talking.
Yeah, after we finish, we'll let him leave, and then you can give me your underwear, and we'll put those in a bag.
Eventually, the investigators got Becky to put her shirt back on, but they could scarcely believe what they had just witnessed. And by the time the strange interview was over, they were all but convinced that Becky was more than just an innocent bystander to the shooting.
We knew that there was something going on.
It was just all incredibly bizarre behavior.
By the morning of September 21st, police in Mustang, Oklahoma were no longer investigating the shooting of 52-year-old Keith Bryan. Instead, they were investigating his murder. It was around 6 that morning when the surgeon stepped into the crowded waiting room and broke the news.
He said basically this is not a survivable wound. It was all the way through the brain.
Then, the doctors let friends and family into the room to say their goodbyes, starting with Keith's wife, 52-year-old Becky Bryan.
She kissed him on the forehead and stepped back for his mom to come up there. They were pretty somber. There wasn't a whole lot of reaction.
People didn't know what to think, what to say.
And they would have been speechless if they had known what the police were thinking. By the time Keith was pronounced dead that morning, the investigators considered Becky the prime suspect in her husband's murder. First, there was her strange story about the mysterious intruder who had supposedly killed Keith.
They were watching a movie, and a gentleman came in, a young man, and shot Keith, turned to Becky Bryan, said, "Ma'am, he should have hired me," and walked straight back out the way he had come.
Then there was the fact that the likely murder weapon had been found hidden in the Bryan's dryer, along with a pair of rubber gloves and an empty shell casing.
What thief, what killer would drop all that off in the dryer of the home?
And finally, there was Becky's bizarre behavior during her interview with the police, calling Keith's killer cute, taking off her clothes, and almost appearing to flirt with one of the investigators.
You want my panties?
Some of the behavior she exhibited that evening was beyond the pale of what you would consider odd.
It wasn't just what Becky said to the investigators either. After they finished questioning her, the investigators followed up with Debbie Proctor, the woman Becky said had dropped by the Bryans' house roughly an hour before the shooting.
She was out there with Keith, and Rebecca had iced tea and smoked out on the porch.
Questioned by the investigators, Debbie confirmed that she had been by the Bryans that night. Debbie also told them she had driven Becky to the hospital after the shooting.
That was another case where she really started to act strangely.
According to Debbie, during the drive, Becky had shown her a photo on her phone, a photo of a man's penis.
She had said, "Can you believe I had sex with this today?"
As uncomfortable as that had made Debbie, she said the really shocking part was when Becky made it pretty clear that the penis in the picture wasn't Keith's.
She had had an extramarital affair.
And before the day was out, the investigators would discover more surprising details about Becky's extramarital activities. The Mustang police received a call from a man named Mark Holbrook, who had just heard the news about Keith's death. Although he lived 200 miles away in the small town of Hugo, Oklahoma, he told the police that he had met Becky 2 years earlier, in the summer of 2009.
They met at a conference. They were both realtors. They were going to a class to sort of get some sort of license or other, and they were both in this class.
And according to Mark, when their week-long class ended, he and Becky had continued to see one another.
He and Becky would plan secret get-togethers.
There was a smaller town in Oklahoma where there was about halfway between the two. And it was right along Interstate 40. They would drive there and meet.
And by December of 2009, what had started as a sexual fling at roadside motels had taken a serious turn.
They talked about divorcing their spouses and getting married.
They talked about it, but not for long, according to Mark. He told the police that he broke things off with Becky not long after New Year's 2010.
They spent a weekend together. She rented a cabin. That was the first time he'd really been alone with her for any significant amount of time.
He started to kind of see a different side of her. She had actually filed for divorce right around that time, and she was pressuring Mark Holbrook to do the same thing, to end his marriage, to leave his wife, and he was still a bit conflicted, and it was around that time that he decided to end it.
Mark claimed that when he broke things off with Becky, she sent him a text claiming she was pregnant. Mark said he never answered the text. He told the police that he believed his 51-year-old lover was bluffing.
He said that he felt manipulated by her, that it was her trying to pressure him to leave his wife.
Her ploy had failed, and soon after, in March of 2010, Becky had gone back to Keith.
She told people that things were better.
But Mark claimed that she continued to try and contact him, too.
She would email him, text him, try to call him.
Mark told the investigators he had ignored Becky's texts and emails.
He continued to work on his marriage, and it appeared he'd put it back together.
According to Mark, Becky had eventually stopped trying to contact him. He figured he had put the whole sordid episode behind him until September 20th, just hours before Keith's murder, when Becky had suddenly started trying to get in touch with him.
That day, there were text messages and calls. She attempted to call him.
Mark said he didn't return Becky's texts or return her calls, but he claimed she had been pleading to see him again.
She left a voicemail to Mark saying, "I can't live without you, I love you."
And that wasn't all Becky had said, according to Mark.
She says that she expects to get an inheritance soon.
But what about the man's picture Becky had supposedly shown her friend Debbie Proctor, the man she claimed to have had sex with the day of Keith's murder? Was it possible Mark wasn't telling the whole story? Pressed by the investigators, he swore that the affair was over.
He didn't want to have anything to do with her.
And to prove it, Mark Holbrook agreed to make a phone call to Becky and let the police listen in.
They recorded a phone conversation between him and Becky. He called saying, "Becky, I'm so sorry. I got your voicemail the next day after you left it."
Thank you for calling me. I really need you, Mark.
Well, and that's what freaked me out, because you contacted me, and then the same night, Keith ends up getting shot, and I just freaked out. I'm like, what in the world is going on?
Asked point blank about her husband's murder, Becky told a blatant lie. According to Becky, Keith's killer was dead.
And the guy that shot Keith and put Matt Bullets, he killed himself yesterday in River City, so I'm no longer in danger.
You can't help but connect the dots as you're going along, all the while thinking, okay, maybe it's just another bizarre statement. Maybe she's innocent. We don't know.
Mark also asked Becky to clarify her cryptic comment about coming into an inheritance.
I didn't know what you was talking about.
Oh, I had an aunt, and she passed away. She was my dad's sister.
Oh, okay.
Minutes later, Becky admitted that she still had feelings for Mark. Strong feelings.
I wake up, the first thing I think of, when I go to sleep, the last thing I think of.
He said, "Becky, that's crazy talk. I'm calling to talk about your husband who was just shot by a complete stranger. And now you're wanting to talk about us?"
I want to, be with my wife. This thing is over with us, and,
I know. I'm so sorry.
The call ended without a confession. But would the police need one? Over the next few days, ballistics tests confirmed what they expected. The gun found in the dryer matched the bullet that killed Keith.
The gun turns out to be the murder weapon once it was tested.
And based on the results of the gunshot residue test, Becky had apparently fired it.
She had gunshot residue on one of her hands, and the one that was theoretically covered with a glove didn't have.
On September 23rd, 3 days after Becky called 911 and reported that an intruder had just shot her husband, the Mustang police placed her under arrest for first-degree murder.
I was shocked. It was very emotional, and to think she may have really done this, it was tough to take.
We were still not wanting to believe.
Around the Oklahoma City suburb of Mustang, people were used to seeing Becky Bryan's picture. As one of the area's most successful real estate agents, the pretty blonde smiling headshot had been plastered on advertisement signs and sales flyers for years.
She was like top salesperson. I mean, she was number one in her area.
But ever since September of 2011, Mustang had been seeing a very different image of the successful real estate agent, her mugshot. The mother of two had been charged with the murder of her husband, 52-year-old Keith Bryan, a local fire chief and former city councilman.
Everyone sort of knew them in town.
He was a fire chief for a long time. He was very well thought of.
There was a tremendous amount of publicity about it.
Becky's murder trial began on her 54th birthday, May 8, 2013, and the courtroom was crammed with family, friends, and firefighters.
He had so many friends that loved him.
They knew and loved Keith, but they barely recognized Becky when she walked into court that morning. Almost 2 years after her arrest, the glamorous blonde real estate agent was long gone.
Her hair was darker, it was gray and brown, no makeup. It definitely was a stark contrast between the woman in that glamorous photo and the woman who showed up in court.
But the truly shocking thing about Becky wasn't her appearance. It was the fact that she allegedly led a secret life. In their opening statement, the prosecutors stunned the friends and family in the courtroom by announcing that Becky hadn't just had one affair. She'd had a whole string of illicit lovers.
None of us knew. I mean, it was out of the blue. It was another side of Becky that we'd never seen.
Though some people had seen that side of Becky and more. Her friend Debbie Proctor took the stand for the prosecution and said that Becky had met a man in Dallas less than a week before the shooting.
She went to Dallas for a wedding, met a man at a bar in Dallas, and went home and slept with him. Complete stranger.
She also described how barely an hour after Keith had been shot, Becky had been showing off a picture of another man's penis.
She showed that to Debbie and made a comment about how she'd had sex with him that day.
And in the year and a half since Becky's arrest, the investigators had tracked down the mystery man. A real estate client of Becky's, he took the stand for the prosecution and told the jury how Becky had stopped off at his house on her way home from a conference in Tulsa, just hours before the shooting.
He was asked, "When did you sleep with Becky Bryan?" He said, "The day she killed her husband." You could hear a pin drop in the courtroom.
Another man who took the stand wasn't a former lover, although it wasn't for lack of trying on Becky's part. A fellow real estate agent, he testified that he had met Becky just prior to Keith's murder at the conference in Tulsa.
Literally talked to him for 5 minutes, and he was there with his wife, and the next day she sent him text messages, including naked photos of herself, text messages saying, "I'm in my hotel room, come and get me."
We were all shocked. Becky was a person, there wasn't a hair out of place. Makeup was perfect. To think that she would take pictures of herself and send them to somebody and soliciting for sex was just beyond us.
Even more incredible, he was only one of several men Becky had supposedly solicited for sex during the conference.
There were several men who'd received these text messages who all said that they were a little creeped out.
Then, after painting a picture of a woman who was definitely out of control, the prosecutors called Becky's former lover, Mark Holbrook, to the stand.
This was the big love of her life.
The prosecutors believed she was still obsessed.
Mark testified that their relationship had been brief.
He realized what a manipulative person she was, so he broke it off.
But he also testified that Becky had trouble letting go.
He said he never contacted her again, but she continued to contact him.
According to Mark and Becky's phone records, that included the day of Keith's murder.
The voicemail she left him the night of the murder indicates she still had feelings for him.
Had Becky killed her husband so she could try to win back her former lover? The prosecutors had no way of knowing, but they told the jury that the forensic evidence was clear. Shortly after Becky left that message on Holbrook's voicemail, she shot her husband in the head.
The prosecution tried to show that Becky took the Ruger .380 pistol, held it up to Keith Bryan's head, and pulled the trigger.
When it was the defense's turn, they pointed out that the prosecution had one problem. Becky didn't have a motive to kill her husband.
She was financially successful. I don't know why you go to such extreme to get out of a marriage.
Especially since Becky had already filed for divorce once.
Why not just go ahead with the divorce? There is no real explanation.
And as Becky sat silently in the courtroom, the defense reminded the jurors that the fact that she'd had affairs and appeared to flirt with an investigator wasn't enough evidence to convict her of murder.
Her defense attorney kept trying to prove that you cannot judge her by her bizarre behavior.
According to the defense, the gunshot residue on Becky wasn't as damning as the prosecutors made it seem either. Arguing that she had been in the room when he was killed, the defense claimed it wasn't surprising that the test had come back positive.
She saw him being shot.
Instead, the defense argued that the investigators had rushed to judgment, ruling out Becky's account of the shooting far too soon.
The way the defense tried to put it was that once they found the gun in that dryer, they pretty much zeroed in on Becky Bryan.
The defense maintained that it was the intruder, the true killer, who had ditched the gun in the dryer, despite the fact that Becky had neglected to mention that in her statement.
They maintained that this intruder had been the one to shoot Keith.
And according to the defense, he had never been caught because the investigators hadn't really tried.
There were some legitimate criticisms you could make of the way they handled the crime scene, and the defense did a really good job of trying to highlight some of those mistakes.
Her defense attorney said, "Why didn't you take fingerprints of the dryer?"
There could be some reasonable doubt, perhaps.
On May 21st, 2013, the jury in Becky Bryan's murder trial announced that it had reached a verdict. According to the prosecutors, the 54-year-old former real estate agent and Sunday school teacher had shot her husband, Keith, after committing a slew of illicit affairs.
You had this woman who comes from an upper middle class family, who's been married a long time, who is older, a professional, and this behavior was hard for people to even understand.
The prosecution was unable to explain why she had committed the murder, and the defense said that was because she hadn't. They argued investigators had been too quick to rule out Becky's claim that an intruder had killed Keith.
They really tried to mince the forensic evidence to show that it couldn't, Becky may not have been the one to pull the trigger.
In a criminal case, all you have to do is put reasonable doubt in one juror's mind and the defendant's not convicted.
But had it happened in this case? When the verdict was read, the jury found Becky guilty of first-degree murder.
Nobody wanted it to be true, but there was too much evidence to believe that she wasn't.
She was sentenced to life without parole.
It was just a relief that the trial part was over and that justice had been done.
However, despite the sense of relief, there was little rejoicing.
There was no hugging and celebrating. There was just really nothing to be happy about.
There was still plenty of grief, however, both for the friend they had lost.
Keith touched a lot of lives, and it's a tragedy that he's not around.
And for the friend they thought they knew.
It's still a shock to see it, that she could do this. She's not the same person. I don't know how to describe her now.
I would like to know what her motivation is, or was, but I don't know. It just made me wonder if I really knew Becky.
There are few places in modern society where trust is given as completely as it is inside a hospital. When a person is admitted to an intensive care unit, they surrender control of nearly every aspect of their survival. They trust strangers to monitor their heartbeat, administer medication, interpret test results, and make decisions that can determine whether they live or die. Family members sit beside hospital beds believing that every person wearing a medical uniform is working toward the same goal, keeping their loved one alive. For most of us, that trust feels natural. It is the foundation upon which modern medicine is built. But what happens when the person entrusted with protecting life begins deliberately placing it in danger? What happens when the emergency itself is not an accident, not a complication, not an unavoidable consequence of illness, but something intentionally created by the very person expected to prevent it? This is the story of Niels Hogel, a man who worked as a nurse in Germany, a man whose job was to care for some of the most vulnerable patients in the healthcare system, a man who, according to German courts, murdered 85 people, and a man whom investigators believe may have been responsible for far more deaths than will ever be proven. This case is often described as one of the largest medical killing sprees in modern history. Not because of a single shocking act, not because of one terrible night, but because it unfolded quietly over years hidden behind hospital walls and medical procedures. Disguised as ordinary tragedy, the deaths did not initially appear suspicious. Patients in intensive care units die. That is an unfortunate reality of medicine. The individuals admitted to these wards are often facing serious health conditions. Families understand that outcomes are uncertain. Doctors and nurses understand that despite their best efforts, not every life can be saved. In such an environment, death rarely arrives as a surprise. And perhaps that is what made this case so difficult to detect. The victims were not found in alleyways. There were no dramatic crime scenes, no frantic emergency calls reporting violence, no witnesses watching a killer flee into the night. Instead, there were hospital rooms, medical charts, heart monitors, and grieving families who believed they were witnessing the natural course of illness. For years, no one knew the full truth. Yet beneath the surface, patterns were beginning to emerge. Patterns that would later become impossible to ignore. In the early 2000s, hospitals in northern Germany began experiencing an unusual number of medical emergencies during certain shifts. Patients suffered sudden cardiac crises. Heart rhythms became unstable. Emergency resuscitation procedures were initiated. Medical teams rushed into action. Machines sounded alarms. Doctors and nurses fought desperately to save lives. And in the middle of these emergencies, one particular nurse often appeared. Niels Hogel. At first, His presence did not seem unusual. In fact, some saw it as evidence of his competence. After all, emergency medicine rewards quick reactions. When a patient suddenly deteriorates, healthcare workers who respond effectively can earn admiration from colleagues. The ability to remain calm under pressure is highly valued. In critical care environments, where every second matters, those who perform well during emergencies often develop strong professional reputations. And according to later testimony, Hogel appeared to thrive during these moments. Some colleagues would eventually describe how he seemed energized whenever a crisis occurred. He enjoyed participating in resuscitations. He liked being involved in life-or-death situations. At the time, such behavior could easily be interpreted as dedication. But years later, investigators would come to a far more disturbing conclusion. What if the emergencies were not random? What if they were being created? That question would ultimately expose a reality more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Because according to prosecutors, Hogel was not simply responding to medical crises. He was causing them. The allegations were staggering. Investigators concluded that Hogel administered dangerous cardiac medications to patients who had been entrusted to his care. These medications triggered life-threatening complications. Some patients suffered severe disturbances in heart rhythm. Others experienced cardiac arrest. Then, as medical teams raced to save them, Hogel would participate in the efforts to reverse the very crisis he had allegedly created. The motive identified by prosecutors was not financial gain. There was no evidence that he killed for money. The murders were not linked to robbery. They were not acts of revenge. They were not the result of personal disputes with the victims. Instead, investigators concluded that Hogel sought something far less tangible but no less dangerous. Attention, recognition, the excitement of emergency intervention, the opportunity to demonstrate his abilities in front of colleagues, the chance to become, in the eyes of others, a hero. It is a motive that can be difficult to comprehend. Most people enter healthcare because they want to help. Most medical professionals dedicate their lives to reducing suffering. Yet this case would reveal how a position built upon trust can be exploited in ways almost impossible to imagine. As investigators dug deeper, the scale of the tragedy continued to expand. Initially, authorities examined only a limited number of suspicious incidents. Then more cases emerged. Then more, and more. What began as questions surrounding individual deaths eventually evolved into one of the largest criminal investigations in German medical history. The numbers alone are difficult to absorb. German courts ultimately convicted Niels Hogel of 85 murders. 85, a number so large that it almost loses its emotional meaning. 85 individuals, 85 lives, 85 families, 85 stories interrupted forever. Yet even that figure may not represent the full extent of the tragedy. Investigators later stated that the actual number of victims could be significantly higher. Some estimates suggested that the true total might exceed 200, perhaps even 300. The exact number may never be known. Many potential victims had already been cremated. Some medical records were incomplete. Years had passed before the full scope of the investigation began. Evidence that might have answered crucial questions had simply disappeared with time. And so, behind every confirmed victim stands the possibility of many others whose deaths may never be fully explained. That uncertainty continues to haunt the case. Because while court verdicts establish legal facts, they do not always reveal the complete truth. Sometimes the truth is larger. Sometimes it extends beyond what can be proven. And in this case, the gap between what is known and what may have happened remains deeply unsettling. Perhaps even more disturbing than the numbers themselves is where these crimes occurred. Hospitals are designed to be places of protection. When danger exists outside, hospitals are where people seek safety. Families place extraordinary faith in medical professionals. Patients often have little choice but to trust the individuals responsible for their care. That trust is not merely a social expectation. It is a necessity. Without trust, healthcare cannot function. Yet the Niels Hogel case would demonstrate how devastating the consequences can be when that trust is violated. For years, relatives mourned loved ones believing they had died from illness. Many accepted explanations that seemed medically reasonable. Many never questioned what had happened. Why would they? The deaths occurred in hospitals, under professional supervision, within institutions designed to save lives. Only later would some families learn that investigators suspected something far different. The realization transformed ordinary grief into something much more complicated. Questions emerged. Could the death have been prevented? What really happened during those final moments? Who was present? What medications were administered? And perhaps most painful of all, was the person they trusted actually responsible? Those questions would echo through courtrooms, investigations, and countless personal conversations as the truth gradually emerged. But before Germany would confront one of the darkest medical scandals in its modern history, before investigators would review thousands of records and exhume more than 100 bodies, before court proceedings would expose the staggering scale of the crimes, there was simply a nurse, a healthcare worker building a career, a familiar face in hospital corridors, a man who appeared, at least on the surface, to be part of the system designed to protect patients. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we must begin long before the investigation. We must go back to the beginning, to the life of Niels Hogel, to the hospitals where he worked, to the patients who placed their trust in him, and to the warning signs that, for years, remained hidden in plain sight. Before the investigations, before the courtrooms, before the headlines that would eventually describe one of the largest medical killing sprees in modern German history, there was a young man beginning a career in healthcare. Unlike many notorious criminals whose biographies are marked by extreme violence, chaotic childhoods, or obvious warning signs, the publicly known background of Niels Hogel appeared remarkably ordinary. He was born on December 30th, 1976, in Wilhelmshaven, a city in the German state of Lower Saxony. His upbringing did not immediately suggest the future that awaited. There were no widely reported stories of severe childhood instability, no dramatic accounts of criminal behavior during his youth, no publicly known history that clearly foreshadowed the scale of what investigators would later uncover. In many ways, that normality is one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. The image that emerges from the available information is not one of an obvious outsider, but of someone who appeared to fit comfortably into a profession built upon trust. Healthcare was not a distant or unfamiliar world for him. His father worked as a nurse, and several members of his family were involved in medical care. The profession was part of the environment in which he grew up. For many people, exposure to healthcare through family members creates a sense of respect for the work. It can inspire a desire to help others. It can encourage a commitment to caring for those who are sick, injured, or vulnerable. Eventually, Hogel chose that path himself. After completing his education, he trained as a nurse and entered the healthcare system. At first glance, this decision seemed entirely consistent with his background. Thousands of nurses across Germany dedicate their lives to helping patients recover. Nursing is a profession that demands technical knowledge, emotional resilience, and an ability to function under pressure. It is difficult work, often exhausting work. It is also work that carries enormous responsibility. every medication administered, every patient monitored, every change in condition observed can have life-altering consequences. Hogel eventually found himself working in one of the most demanding environments in modern medicine, the intensive care unit, commonly known as the ICU. To understand the significance of what happened later, it is important to understand what an intensive care unit actually represents. For many people, the ICU is simply another department inside a hospital. But for patients and families, it often becomes the center of their world. Intensive care units are designed to treat those whose conditions are so serious that they require constant observation and immediate access to advanced medical intervention. These are the patients who cannot safely be cared for in ordinary hospital wards. Their conditions may change rapidly. Their lives may depend upon machines, medications, and highly trained medical professionals. Within these units, every heartbeat matters. Every fluctuation in blood pressure matters. Every change in oxygen levels matters. Staff members continuously monitor information that can reveal the difference between recovery and catastrophe. The environment itself reflects this reality. Monitors display vital signs. Medical equipment surrounds the beds. Alarms can sound at any moment. Doctors, nurses, and specialists work together to make critical decisions under intense pressure. Families often stand at the edge of these rooms, feeling powerless. They watch medical professionals perform tasks they do not fully understand. They place their trust in expertise because they have no alternative. That trust becomes especially profound when a loved one is unable to speak for themselves. Many ICU patients are heavily medicated. Some are unconscious. Others are physically unable to communicate. They cannot independently verify which medications they are receiving. They cannot monitor every procedure. They rely entirely upon the people responsible for their care. This reality creates one of the most sacred responsibilities in healthcare. The relationship between a critically ill patient and a medical professional is built upon dependence. The patient depends upon the caregiver not only for comfort, but for survival itself. Most healthcare workers honor that responsibility every day. They work long hours. They respond to emergencies. They endure emotional strain that few outside the profession ever fully understand. They witness suffering and loss while continuing to care for the next patient who needs them. It is precisely because the vast majority of medical professionals perform this work with integrity that the actions attributed to Hogel shocked Germany so profoundly. The case was not simply about murder. It was about the violation of one of society's deepest forms of trust. The victims themselves came from different backgrounds, different families, and different stages of life. According to the investigation, their ages range from 34 to 96 years old. Some are middle-aged adults. Others were elderly individuals. They did not belong to a single demographic category. What united them was not who they were outside the hospital, but where they found themselves inside. Most were patients receiving treatment in intensive care units. Many were already facing significant health challenges. Yet one detail would later become critically important. Numerous victims were not considered to be on the verge of death before the events that investigators examined. This point matters because it challenges assumptions that can easily arise when discussing crimes committed in medical settings. Intensive care units naturally contain very sick patients. Death occurs there more frequently than in many other hospital departments. Because of this, it can be tempting to assume that every death was inevitable. The investigation into Hogel suggested otherwise. Authorities concluded that many patients experienced life-threatening crises after being administered dangerous cardiac medications. In some cases, patients survived. In others, they did not. The outcome varied. But according to prosecutors, the medical emergencies themselves had been intentionally triggered. Behind every case number was a human being. A person who had entered the healthcare system expecting treatment. A person whose family expected medical professionals to provide care. a person who likely never imagined becoming part of a criminal investigation years later. It is easy, when confronted with large numbers, to lose sight of individual lives. 85 confirmed murders is a statistic of staggering magnitude. Yet statistics can create distance. They can make tragedy feel abstract. The reality is that each victim represented an entire world of relationships. Every death affected spouses, children, parents, siblings, friends, co-workers, and communities. Every hospital room contained people hoping for recovery. Every phone call informing relatives about a medical crisis altered someone's life forever. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking dimensions of this case is that many families spent years believing they understood how their loved ones died. In ordinary circumstances, grief eventually settles into a painful but stable narrative. Families may not welcome the loss, but they understand its cause. They know what happened. They build memories around that understanding. They learn to live with it. In the Hogel case, that certainty would later be shattered for many people. Imagine being told that a relative died from complications associated with a serious illness. Imagine accepting that explanation because it seems medically plausible. Imagine mourning, holding a funeral, and attempting to move forward. Then years later, investigators contact you and reveal that the death may not have been natural at all. Suddenly, every memory changes. Every detail becomes uncertain. Questions emerge where answers once existed. Families were forced to confront possibilities they had never considered. Was the decline truly unavoidable? Did warning signs exist? Could the death have been prevented? These questions would become part of the broader legacy of the case. Yet, during the years when the crimes were allegedly occurring, most of these families knew nothing about the suspicions that would later dominate headlines. They trusted the institutions around them. Hospitals are among the most respected organizations in modern society. They are places people turn to during moments of vulnerability. Patients arrive seeking help. Families seek reassurance. Communities invest immense faith in the competence and ethics of medical professionals. In northern Germany, that faith remained intact as Hogel continued working in healthcare. To colleagues and supervisors, he was a nurse operating within a demanding medical environment. To patients, he was one of the professionals responsible for their treatment. To families, he was part of the team caring for people they loved. At this stage of the story, the scale of the future tragedy remained hidden. The public did not know his name. No major criminal investigation had yet exposed the pattern that authorities would later identify. The victims were still patients. The families were still families. The hospitals were still places where people expected healing. Yet beneath the ordinary routines of intensive care medicine, something deeply troubling was beginning to take shape. The events that followed would eventually transform individual tragedies into a national scandal, expose failures that allowed warning signs to go unaddressed, and force Germany to confront difficult questions about accountability, oversight, and trust. But before investigators would begin examining thousands of medical records, before courts would hear evidence about dozens of deaths, and before the world would learn the name Niels Hogel, the story remained hidden inside hospital corridors, patient files, and emergency interventions that seemed, at least on the surface, to be nothing more than the unpredictable realities of critical care medicine. The people at the center of the story had no reason to believe they were witnessing the beginning of one of the most disturbing chapters in modern German criminal history. And that is where the next stage of the case begins. By the beginning of the 2000s, Niels Hogel had established himself within the healthcare system as a nurse working in intensive care. On the surface, his career appeared to follow a path familiar to countless medical professionals across Germany. Hospitals rely on experienced ICU staff to monitor critically ill patients, respond to emergencies, and help coordinate life-saving interventions. It is a demanding environment where mistakes can have devastating consequences and where competence is often measured by the ability to remain calm under extraordinary pressure. Between 2000 and 2005, Hogel worked at hospitals in Oldenburg and Delmenhorst. These institutions, like many hospitals, cared for patients facing serious medical conditions. People arrived seeking treatment, hoping for recovery, and trusting the professionals responsible for their care. Families waited for updates from doctors and nurses. Some patients improved, others deteriorated. Such outcomes were part of the difficult reality of intensive care medicine. Yet, according to investigators and prosecutors, something far more sinister was occurring during these years. The allegations that would later emerge did not involve a sudden burst of violence or a single catastrophic event. Instead, authorities concluded that the crimes followed a repeated pattern. It was a pattern hidden within the normal routines of hospital life, a pattern that exploited both the complexity of medicine and the trust placed in healthcare professionals. According to the findings presented in court, Hogel used dangerous cardiac medications to create medical emergencies. The method described by investigators was both simple and horrifying. Patients under his care would receive medications that were not intended for them in those circumstances. These drugs affected the cardiovascular system. The result could be severe disturbances in heart rhythm or even complete cardiac arrest. In other words, a patient who might have been stable, or at least not facing immediate death, could suddenly experience a life-threatening crisis. From the outside, such a collapse could appear natural. After all, intensive care patients often suffer from serious illnesses. Sudden deterioration is not unheard of in hospital settings. Doctors and nurses routinely confront unexpected complications. A cardiac event occurring in an ICU patient would not automatically suggest criminal activity. That reality became one of the factors that allowed the pattern to remain hidden for so long. According to prosecutors, the process often followed a similar sequence. First came access. As a nurse, Hogel was in a position that allowed him to interact directly with patients and medications. Hospitals function on trust. Medical teams must trust one another in order to provide effective care. Patients trust that medications are being administered appropriately. Families trust that treatment decisions are being made in the patient's best interests. Within such a system, opportunities for abuse can be difficult to detect unless someone actively begins looking for them. The second stage involved the administration of dangerous medication. Investigators concluded that Hogel deliberately gave certain patients drugs capable of triggering cardiac emergencies. These actions allegedly transformed ordinary hospital care into life-threatening situations. What happened next was central to the prosecution's understanding of the case. Once the patient's condition deteriorated, alarms would sound. Medical personnel would rush to respond. Emergency protocols would be activated. Doctors and nurses would work desperately to stabilize the patient. And in many instances, Hogel himself participated in those efforts. This aspect of the case distinguished it from many other forms of serial murder. Prosecutors argued that he was not merely causing death. He was creating crises and then positioning himself within the attempts to resolve them. The courtroom proceedings later focused heavily on motive. Why would someone working in healthcare deliberately place patients in danger? The evidence presented by prosecutors pointed away from motives commonly associated with murder. There was no indication that financial gain drove the crimes. There was no suggestion that the victims had personal conflicts with Hogel. The patients did not represent enemies, rivals, or targets of revenge. Instead, prosecutors concluded that Hogel sought something psychological. According to his own statements and the findings of investigators, he wanted to experience the excitement associated with emergency medical intervention. He wanted to witness the dramatic moment when a patient suddenly deteriorated. He wanted the opportunity to participate in resuscitations. And perhaps most importantly, he wanted recognition for his role in those events. Some colleagues would later describe how he appeared energized during emergencies. In most healthcare settings, such enthusiasm might initially be interpreted as dedication. Medical professionals are expected to respond quickly during crises. Those who perform effectively often earn respect. The difference, according to prosecutors, was that Hogel allegedly helped create the emergencies themselves. If that conclusion was correct, then the image of a committed nurse responding heroically to critical situations was fundamentally misleading. The emergency was not something he happened to encounter. It was something he had allegedly engineered. This realization transformed ordinary hospital incidents into potential crime scenes. Every unexpected cardiac crisis suddenly demanded a new question. Was this a natural medical event? Or was it something else? The consequences for patients were devastating. Not every targeted patient died. According to the investigation, some survived after suffering the induced medical emergencies. However, survival did not necessarily mean escape from harm. Serious cardiac events can cause significant damage. Patients who survive may still endure major physical consequences. Others were not as fortunate. Many died despite efforts to save them. For families, these deaths often appear to be tragic but understandable outcomes associated with severe illness. Loved ones grieved, believing that medicine had simply reached its limits. They had little reason to suspect criminal conduct. In many cases, they never imagined asking such questions. The hospital environment itself encouraged acceptance. When doctors explain that a critically ill patient has suffered cardiac arrest, families naturally focus on the loss rather than the possibility of foul play. Medical terminology can seem overwhelming. Most relatives lack the information necessary to independently evaluate what happened. They depend upon healthcare institutions to provide accurate explanations. That trust would later become one of the most painful themes of the entire case. As the years passed, the alleged pattern continued. Patients experienced sudden cardiac crises. Resuscitation efforts followed. Deaths accumulated. Yet the full picture remained obscured because each event was viewed individually. One death alone might not appear unusual. 2 deaths might still be explained by circumstance. Even several deaths in an ICU could potentially be attributed to the serious conditions of the patients involved. The challenge was recognizing the broader pattern. Investigators later argued that the significance of the events became visible only when numerous cases were examined together. Looking at a single patient might not reveal anything suspicious. Looking at dozens of patients created a different picture. It became possible to identify recurring features, similar medical emergencies, similar circumstances, similar connections to Hogel's presence. At the time, however, that broader perspective had not yet fully emerged. Hospital staff were focused on individual cases, individual shifts, and individual emergencies. The institution continued functioning. Patients continued arriving. Families continued placing their trust in healthcare professionals. Yet subtle warning signs were beginning to appear. Over time, some colleagues reportedly noticed unusual patterns. There seemed to be an unexpectedly high number of cardiac emergencies during shifts involving Hogel. Resuscitations occurred with striking frequency. Certain doctors began to feel that something was not quite right. Importantly, these concerns did not immediately lead to the discovery of a serial killer. Suspicion is not proof. Hospitals are complicated environments where unusual patterns can emerge for many reasons. Medical professionals must be careful before drawing conclusions about colleagues. Nonetheless, the existence of these concerns would later become a critical aspect of the story. They suggested that warning signs had existed long before the criminal investigation began. The significance of those warning signs would become clearer only in hindsight. Looking back after the convictions, observers could see connections that were not obvious at the time. the recurring emergencies, the concentration of incidents during specific shifts, and the repeated presence of one individual all appeared far more alarming once investigators began assembling the larger picture. But during the years between 2000 and 2005, the pattern remained largely hidden. The hospitals in Oldenburg and Delmenhorst continued operating. Patients continued receiving treatment. Families continued hoping for recovery. And according to prosecutors, the cycle continued. A patient would suffer a sudden cardiac crisis. Medical staff would rush to respond. Some lives would be saved. Others would be lost. Behind each incident stood a question that had not yet been fully asked. Why were these emergencies happening? The answer would not emerge through routine medical review. It would not come from a single suspicious death. Instead, the breakthrough would begin with an observation. A moment when someone witnessed something that should not have happened. A moment that would eventually trigger one of the largest medical investigations in German history. For years, the alleged crimes had blended into the background of hospital life. Soon, that would change. And when it did, the consequences would reach far beyond a single hospital ward, forcing investigators to confront the possibility that the true scale of the tragedy was far greater than anyone had imagined. Part 4. The Investigation and the Breakthrough. For years, the events surrounding Niels Hogel existed in a space between suspicion and certainty. Patients suffered unexpected cardiac crises. Resuscitations occurred with unusual frequency. Some medical professionals reportedly sensed that something was wrong. Yet the gap between a troubling feeling and a criminal investigation is enormous. Hospitals are complex environments. Critically ill patients can deteriorate suddenly. Complications happen. Death is an unfortunate reality of intensive care medicine. Because of this, even unusual patterns can sometimes be explained away as coincidence, bad luck, or the unavoidable consequences of treating severely ill individuals. Looking back after the convictions, many observers would ask a difficult question. Were there warning signs? According to the information later examined by investigators, the answer appears to have been yes. One of the most significant concerns involved the number of cardiac emergencies occurring during Hogel's shifts. Over time, certain colleagues noticed that serious incidents seemed to happen with unusual frequency when he was working. Patients experienced sudden collapses. Resuscitation efforts became necessary. Emergency interventions appeared again and again. In isolation, each event could be interpreted as an unfortunate medical development. Viewed collectively, however, the pattern became more troubling. Another warning sign involved the sheer volume of resuscitations. Intensive care units regularly perform life-saving procedures, but some staff reportedly began to notice that emergencies seemed unusually common around Hogel. The observations did not immediately produce definitive conclusions. Instead, they generated concern. Questions emerged. Why were so many crises occurring? Was there a medical explanation? Was it merely coincidence? Or was something else happening? Some doctors reportedly developed suspicions. Yet suspicion alone is rarely enough to trigger a major criminal investigation, especially within a hospital. Healthcare systems are built upon professional trust. Accusing a colleague of deliberately harming patients is one of the most serious allegations imaginable. Such claims require evidence. Without clear proof, doubts can remain unspoken or unresolved. This became one of the most important themes of the case. The difference between noticing a problem and acting decisively upon it. According to later findings, concerns existed, but they did not lead to a comprehensive investigation at the time. The significance of this failure would become clearer only years later. One of the most striking details revealed after the crimes came to light involved Hogel's movement between hospitals. Despite the concerns that reportedly existed, he was able to leave one workplace and continue his career elsewhere. Even more remarkably, he reportedly received a positive recommendation letter when departing. In hindsight, This detail became symbolic of the broader institutional failures surrounding the case. A recommendation letter is generally intended to help a professional advance within their career. It signals confidence in the individual's abilities and conduct. Yet in this case, according to later investigations, a man who would eventually become Germany's most notorious healthcare serial killer was able to move forward professionally rather than being subjected to a thorough examination of the concerns surrounding him. The consequences were profound. By continuing to work in healthcare, Hobel remained in a position where investigators later concluded he could continue harming patients. The warning signs had not disappeared. The underlying pattern had not been resolved. Instead, the opportunity for further crimes allegedly remained. This is one reason why the case continues to generate discussion not only about individual responsibility, but also about institutional accountability. Many observers have argued that the story is not solely about one man. It is also about the systems that failed to stop him sooner. Yet for all the missed opportunities and unresolved concerns, the breakthrough did not initially come from a statistical analysis or a large-scale review of hospital records. It began with a single observation, a moment that interrupted the cycle, a moment when someone saw something they should not have seen. In 2005, according to the information presented during the investigation, a colleague caught Hobel administering medication that had not been prescribed for a patient. This was not a vague suspicion or a troubling pattern observed over months. It was a direct observation. For investigators, moments like this often become critical turning points. Patterns can be debated. Statistics can be interpreted in different ways. But a witnessed action creates a concrete starting point. The patient involved later died. That death became the catalyst for a criminal inquiry. At first, authorities did not immediately uncover the full scale of what had happened. The initial investigation focused on specific incidents rather than hundreds of potential victims. This is common in major criminal cases. Investigators begin with the evidence directly in front of them. They examine known events. They establish facts. Only later does the broader picture emerge. As authorities reviewed the circumstances surrounding the patient's death, they began examining additional cases. What they found raised increasingly alarming questions. Medical records were scrutinized. Timelines were reconstructed. Patient outcomes were compared. Gradually, investigators began identifying patterns that extended far beyond a single incident. The inquiry expanded. More deaths were examined. More hospital records were reviewed. More connections emerged. What initially appeared to be a limited investigation slowly transformed into something much larger. The deeper authorities looked, the more cases they discovered that appeared suspicious. One case led to another, then dozens more. Investigators found themselves confronting the possibility that they were not dealing with isolated incidents, but with a prolonged series of murders committed within healthcare institutions. At that point, the challenge became enormous. Establishing responsibility in a medical setting is extraordinarily difficult. Patients in intensive care units often suffer from severe illnesses. Many deaths can appear medically plausible even when foul play is involved. Determining whether a specific death resulted from natural causes or criminal conduct may require extensive review of medical records, medication histories, witness statements, and forensic evidence. To address these challenges, German authorities launched what became one of the largest medical investigations in the nation's history. The scale of the effort reflected the scale of the allegations. Investigators reviewed thousands of hospital records. Each file represented a person. Each document contained details about treatment, medications, diagnoses, and outcomes. Examining such a vast amount of information required extraordinary time and resources. Authorities were essentially attempting to reconstruct years of medical history in order to determine which deaths might have been natural and which might have been criminal. The investigation did not stop there. More than 130 bodies were exhumed. This process is among the most emotionally difficult aspects of any criminal inquiry. Exhumation means reopening graves and revisiting losses that families believed had already been laid to rest. For relatives, it can be a painful reminder of grief they have spent years trying to process. Yet investigators considered these steps necessary in order to search for evidence and establish the truth. The inquiry eventually extended beyond Germany itself. Investigative efforts reached into other countries, including Poland and Turkey. The international dimension reflected the complexity of determining the identities and circumstances of potential victims. Authorities pursued every lead available in their effort to understand the scope of the crimes. As the investigation expanded, another disturbing reality became apparent. The true number of victims might never be known. This uncertainty stemmed from several factors identified during the inquiry. Some bodies had already been cremated, eliminating opportunities for further forensic examination. In other cases, records were incomplete or unavailable. Time itself had become an obstacle. Years had passed between many of the deaths and the beginning of the comprehensive investigation. Evidence that might have existed earlier was no longer accessible. Witness memories had faded. Documents had been lost or destroyed. Certain questions simply could not be answered with complete certainty. This limitation became one of the defining characteristics of the case. Investigators ultimately identified a large number of murders. Yet they also concluded that the actual total could be substantially higher. The gap between confirmed victims and suspected victims remains one of the most haunting aspects of the story. Every unresolved case represents uncertainty. Every missing record raises questions. Every cremated body removes the possibility of additional forensic answers. As authorities continue their work, the scale of the tragedy grew increasingly difficult to comprehend. What had begun with a colleague observing an unauthorized injection had evolved into an investigation spanning years of hospital activity. Thousands of patient records and more than 100 exhumations. The inquiry forced Germany to confront a deeply unsettling possibility that a trusted healthcare professional may have used his position to harm an extraordinary number of vulnerable patients while warning signs went unaddressed. Yet despite the expanding evidence, one crucial stage still remained. Investigators had assembled records, identified patterns, and uncovered a potential death toll unlike anything Germany had seen in a medical context. The next challenge would be presenting that evidence in court. Their prosecutors would attempt to transform years of investigative work into criminal convictions. Families would seek answers. The public would learn the staggering scale of the allegations. And Niels Hogel himself would eventually speak about the crimes that investigators believed had claimed dozens of lives. The courtroom would become the place where years of suspicion, evidence, and unanswered questions finally converged. When a criminal trial ends, there's often an expectation that a story has reached its conclusion. A verdict is announced. A sentence is imposed. The defendant is removed from society. The legal process has done its work. Yet in many of the most significant criminal cases, the trial is not the true ending. Instead, it marks the beginning of a different chapter. One focused not on determining guilt, but on understanding consequences. The case of Niels Hogel is one such example. By the time the court convicted him of 85 murders and imposed a life sentence with a finding of particularly severe guilt, Germany had already spent years confronting the reality of what investigators believed had happened inside its hospitals. The legal judgment established criminal responsibility. It confirmed that dozens of patients had been deliberately harmed and killed by a healthcare professional entrusted with their care. But the verdict could not resolve every question left behind by the case. It could not erase the uncertainty surrounding the full number of victims. It could not undo the years during which suspicious patterns went insufficiently investigated. And it could not restore the lives that had been lost. One of the most enduring consequences of the case concerns the families of the victims. For many years, numerous relatives believed they understood how their loved ones had died. The deaths occurred in hospitals. Medical explanations were accepted. Grief followed a path that, while painful, appeared clear. Family members mourned under the assumption that illness or medical complications had taken the people they loved. Then the investigation transformed that understanding. As authorities expanded their inquiry and reviewed deaths connected to Hogel's work, many families found themselves confronting a new and deeply disturbing possibility. The loss they had accepted as natural might not have been natural at all. This realization changed the context of their grief. The death itself remained the same. The absence remained the same, yet the explanation changed. A death once understood as the result of illness could suddenly become part of a criminal investigation. Questions that had never seemed necessary now became unavoidable. Families who believed they had answers discovered that uncertainty still existed. The emotional impact of such a discovery is difficult to measure, but it became an important part of the case's legacy. Another major consequence involved public trust in healthcare institutions. Modern medicine depends on confidence. Patients must trust doctors, nurses, and hospitals. Families must trust medical advice during moments of crisis. Society as a whole relies upon the assumption that healthcare professionals are acting in the best interests of those they treat. Cases like this challenge that assumption in a profound way. The overwhelming majority of healthcare workers dedicate their careers to helping others. They work under pressure, make sacrifices, and provide care during some of the most difficult moments in people's lives. The Hogel case does not change that reality. Yet it demonstrates how much damage can occur when a single individual abuses a position of trust. The crimes attributed to Hogel were especially shocking because they occurred within a setting designed to protect vulnerable people. Patients in intensive care units are among the most dependent individuals in society. Many cannot advocate for themselves. Many cannot monitor their own treatment. They rely entirely upon medical professionals. That dependence is not a flaw in the healthcare system. It is an unavoidable reality of critical illness. But the case illustrated how such dependence can be exploited when proper safeguards fail. As public attention turned toward the broader implications of the investigation, discussion increasingly focused on institutional responsibility. The story was no longer viewed solely as the actions of one man. Questions emerged about how warning signs had been handled. Investigators and observers pointed to several troubling factors. Reports indicated that unusual patterns had been noticed. There were concerns regarding the frequency of cardiac emergencies during Hogel's shifts. Some doctors reportedly suspected that something was wrong. Yet these concerns did not lead to the kind of comprehensive investigation that might have stopped the pattern earlier. This aspect of the case remains one of the most difficult to examine because it involves opportunities that existed before the crimes were fully understood. Looking backward after tragedy, warning signs often appear clearer than they did in real time. Patterns that seem obvious in hindsight may have appeared ambiguous at the moment. Even so, the case generated significant discussion about whether stronger oversight, more thorough review procedures, or more decisive responses to concerns might have prevented additional deaths. Another frequently discussed issue involved Hogel's ability to continue working after leaving one hospital. The fact that he reportedly received a positive recommendation letter despite existing concerns became a symbol of systemic failure. Critics argued that this allowed risks to continue rather than triggering closer examination. Whether viewed as a communication failure, an oversight failure, or a broader institutional problem, the result was the same. Opportunities to identify the threat earlier were missed. The investigation itself also left a lasting mark on Germany. The sheer scale of the inquiry was unprecedented. Authorities reviewed thousands of medical records. More than 130 bodies were exhumed. Investigative efforts extended beyond Germany into other countries, including Poland and Turkey. Such measures reflected the seriousness of the allegations and the determination to establish the truth. Yet despite these extraordinary efforts, the investigation ultimately revealed the limits of what can be known. One of the most haunting aspects of the Hogel case is the possibility that the complete number of victims may never be determined. The court convicted him of 85 murders. That figure alone places the case among the most significant serial murder cases in modern European history. However, investigators stated that the actual number could be substantially higher. Estimates suggested the total may have exceeded 200 or even 300 victims. The challenge was proving those cases. Time had passed. Some bodies had been cremated. Some records were incomplete. Evidence that might once have existed was no longer available. As a result, there remains a gap between the number of confirmed victims and the number of suspected victims. That gap may never be closed. Every unresolved case represents a question without a definitive answer. Every missing piece of evidence represents a limit on what investigators can establish. In many criminal cases, uncertainty exists at the margins. In this case, uncertainty exists on a scale almost as striking as the confirmed facts themselves. This reality contributes significantly to the lasting impact of the story. The known crimes are horrific. The possibility of additional unknown crimes makes the case even more disturbing. It forces society to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the full extent of harm can never be completely measured. Beyond the legal and institutional dimensions, the Hogel case also serves as a reminder of the importance of accountability within trusted professions. Trust is essential, but trust alone is not enough. Effective systems require oversight. They require mechanisms capable of identifying unusual patterns. They require responses when concerns emerge. The investigation demonstrated what can happen when those mechanisms fail to function effectively. It showed how dangerous conduct can remain hidden when warning signs are overlooked or insufficiently examined. At the same time, the case highlights the extraordinary challenges involved in detecting crimes committed within medical settings. Hospitals are not crime scenes in the conventional sense. Patients become ill naturally. Emergencies occur naturally. Death occurs naturally. Distinguishing between natural outcomes and criminal actions can be extraordinarily difficult, especially when the person responsible possesses medical knowledge and operates within a trusted institution. This complexity helps explain why the crimes remain concealed for so long and why the eventual investigation required such enormous resources. As we reach the end of this story, it is worth returning to the central theme that has run through every chapter. This is not simply a case about murder. It is a case about trust. Patients trusted a healthcare professional. Families trusted hospitals. Colleagues trusted one another. Institutions trusted their internal systems. According to the findings of investigators and the judgments of the court, that trust was repeatedly violated. The consequences extended far beyond the individual victims. They affected families, hospitals, healthcare systems, and public confidence. Today, the name Niels Hogel remains associated with one of the darkest chapters in the history of modern German healthcare. He was convicted of 85 murders, sentenced to life imprisonment, and identified as one of the most prolific serial killers in the country's post-war era. Yet the significance of the case lies not only in the number of victims. It lies in the lessons it forces society to confront. It reminds us that trust must be accompanied by accountability. It demonstrates the importance of investigating warning signs rather than dismissing them. And it illustrates how devastating the consequences can be when vulnerable people are failed by the very systems designed to protect them. In hospitals, people fear illness, injury, and the possibility of death. Those fears are natural. They have always existed. But the tragedy of the Hogel case revealed a different kind of danger, one that emerged not from disease itself, but from a trusted caregiver who stood at the bedside of those least able to defend themselves. That is why this case continues to resonate long after the verdict was delivered. It is not only a story about crimes that occurred. It is a story about trust betrayed, warnings missed, and lives lost in a place where people expected to find safety. And that is what makes the legacy of this case so difficult to forget.